The shopping bag slipped from Grace Winter's hand, scattering across the polished marble floor of Scottsdale Fashion Square as she locked eyes with the man she hadn't seen in 3 years. "Grace?" His voice dripped with mock surprise. "Wow, I almost didn't recognize you without your designer knockoffs." Tyler Hutchinson stood there in the middle of Arizona's most exclusive mall, his arm wrapped around a woman wearing enough diamonds to buy a small car. That same condescending smirk she remembered so well plastered across his face. The crowd around them slowed, sensing drama, phones already lifting. "Still shopping at discount stores, I see," he continued, his eyes scanning her simple jeans and cotton blouse with theatrical disgust. "Some things never change." Grace bent down to retrieve her bag, her hand steady despite the hurricane of emotion swirling inside. She said nothing. Not yet, because Tyler Hutchinson, the man who had destroyed her confidence, abandoned her when she needed him most, and spent their final year together telling her she'd never amount to anything, had absolutely no idea what had changed in the 3 years since he walked out. He had no idea who she'd become, and he certainly had no idea who she'd married. Before we dive into this story of karma, revenge, and the sweet taste of justice, let me know in the comments, have you ever run into an ex who treated you terribly? How did it feel? And if you believe that people who judge others by their bank accounts deserve to learn some hard lessons, hit that subscribe button right now. This is a story you won't want to miss, and trust me, the ending will leave you speechless. Now, let's rewind 3 years to understand exactly how Grace Winters went from being the woman Tyler humiliated daily to becoming someone he should have been terrified to cross. 3 years earlier, Grace had been a 28-year-old marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm in Phoenix, living in a modest apartment in Tempe, driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and dating Tyler Hutchinson, a corporate finance manager who never let her forget that he made twice her salary. "You really should let me handle the dinner bill," he'd say in front of their friends, his tone dripping with false generosity. "I know money's tight for you." It wasn't tight. Grace lived within her means, saved responsibly, and refused to measure her worth by the zeros in her bank account. But Tyler saw life differently. Success was a luxury watch, status was a German car, love was transactional, and Grace was always on the losing end of the bargain. Their relationship was a slow descent into emotional abuse disguised as honesty. "I'm just trying to help you improve yourself," he'd say after criticizing her clothes, her career, her friends, her family. "Someone has to be real with you." The breaking point came on a cold January evening in their shared apartment. Grace's mother had just been diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. The treatment would be expensive, even with insurance. Grace was researching financial assistance programs, her laptop open, tears streaming down her face. Tyler came home, saw her crying, and sighed like she'd inconvenienced him. "Let me guess," he said, dropping his briefcase on the couch. "You need money." Grace said quietly, her voice trembling. "My mom is sick. I'm trying to figure out how to help her." "Grace, I've told you 1,000,000 times, your family's problems aren't my responsibility. If your mom didn't make better financial decisions earlier in life, that's on her." Something inside Grace shattered. Not broke, shattered into so many pieces that when she tried to put herself back together later, she'd be unrecognizable. "Get out," she whispered. "What?" "Get out of my apartment, now." Tyler laughed, actually laughed. "Your apartment? Grace, I pay most of the rent. You can barely afford to live here without me." "Then I'll move somewhere I can afford. Get out." He stared at her, waiting for her to back down like she always did. But this time, something in her eyes must have warned him. He grabbed his coat. "You'll regret this. Good luck surviving without me. You're going to end up begging me to come back." The door slammed. Grace sat in the silence of her apartment as she'd been paying the full rent for 8 months while Tyler saved for an investment, and made a decision. She would never, ever let anyone make her feel small again. The next 6 months were the hardest of Grace's life. Her mother's treatment drained their savings. Grace picked up freelance work on top of her day job, working 16-hour days, surviving on coffee and determination. She moved to a studio apartment in a less expensive part of Phoenix. She sold her car and took the bus. But she did something else. She started her own digital marketing consultancy. Grace had always been brilliant at her job. She understood consumer behavior, could predict trends, and had an instinct for branding that her bosses had consistently undervalued. Now, working from her tiny studio at midnight after her day job, she began building something of her own. Her first client was a small organic skincare company run by a woman named Diane Porter, who'd seen her work on a local nonprofit campaign. The budget was small, but Grace poured everything into it. Within 3 months, the company's online sales had tripled. Diane recommended her to another business owner, then another, then another. By the 8th month, Grace quit her day job. By the 10th month, she had 12 clients and hired her first employee. By the end of the year, Winters Digital Consulting had 23 clients, 6 employees, and a reputation for turning struggling businesses into success stories. Grace's mother went into remission, the medical bills were paid, and Grace, working 90-hour weeks in her small office in downtown Phoenix, barely had time to think about Tyler Hutchinson. Until the day she met Preston Hawthorne. It was a Tuesday afternoon at a coffee shop in Scottsdale, the kind of place where a single espresso costs $8 and everyone pretends to be working on their screenplay. Grace was there meeting a potential client, a luxury real estate developer who wanted to rebrand his company. The client never showed. Instead, a man in his late 30s, wearing a casual button-down and jeans that probably cost more than her monthly rent, approached her table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice warm and genuinely apologetic. "I think there's been a mix-up. I'm supposed to meet with a Grace Winters about a marketing proposal." Grace looked up from her laptop. The man was handsome in an understated way, dark hair with traces of silver at the temples, kind brown eyes, the kind of confident posture that came from never having to prove himself. "That would be me," she said, extending her hand, "though I think you might be my 2 o'clock. Richard Donovan?" He laughed, a genuine sound that filled the space between them. "Preston Hawthorne. Richard's my business partner. He had an emergency and asked me to take the meeting. He said if I let you leave without hiring me, I'm fired." "Well," Grace said, smiling despite herself, "I'd hope I'd be responsible for your unemployment. Please sit." That meeting changed everything. Preston Hawthorne wasn't just wealthy, he was generationally, absurdly own half of Scottsdale wealthy. His family's real estate empire, Hawthorne Properties, had shaped the landscape of Arizona for 3 generations. But sitting across from Grace in that coffee shop, talking about brand identity and market positioning, he was just a man who listened when she spoke, who asked thoughtful questions, and who, at the end of 2 hours, said something no client had ever said to her before. "You're brilliant. Not just good at your job, brilliant. I hope you know that." Grace blinked, caught off guard. In a world of men who'd spent years telling her she wasn't enough, here was someone recognizing what she'd always known she could be. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." They started working together, professionally at first. Grace rebranded 3 of Hawthorne Properties' developments, and each launch exceeded projections by margins that made the board of directors question if the numbers were accurate. Preston insisted on meeting weekly to discuss strategy, though Grace suspected the meetings lasted longer than necessary. He'd ask about her day, her mother's health, her dreams beyond the business. He remembered details, how she took her coffee, that she loved old jazz music, that she'd always wanted to travel to Portugal. He never made her feel inferior, never made her feel like she had to earn his respect. 6 months into their professional relationship, after a particularly successful campaign launch, Preston invited her to dinner. Not a business dinner, just dinner. "I know this might be inappropriate," he said, and for the first time she saw him nervous. "And if you'd rather keep things professional, I completely understand. But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the day we met, and I'd regret it forever if I didn't at least ask, would you have dinner with me, as a date, not as a client meeting?" Grace's first instinct was to say no. She'd built walls around her heart so high that even she sometimes forgot how to climb over them. But looking at Preston, this kind, respectful, genuinely good man, she realized that those walls weren't protecting her anymore. They were imprisoning her. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that very much." Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant in downtown Phoenix, the kind of place that didn't need to advertise because everyone who mattered already knew about it. Preston didn't try to impress her with his wealth. He asked about her childhood, her mother, what made her laugh. He told her about losing his father at 16, about the pressure of living up to a family legacy, about feeling lonely despite being surrounded by people who wanted something from him. "Everyone I meet wants either my money or my connections," he said quietly, twirling pasta on his fork. "But you looked at me in that coffee shop and just saw another client, maybe another person. You have no idea how rare that is. You looked at me and saw someone brilliant. You have no idea how rare that is either." They dated for 8 months, slowly, carefully, two people who'd both learned to guard their hearts, discovering that some things are worth the risk. Preston never flaunted his wealth, though Grace quickly realized that wealthy didn't begin to cover it. His modest penthouse overlooked all of Phoenix. His casual car was a Range Rover that cost more than her first year of business revenue. His family's net worth was the kind of number that required multiple commas. But he also drove her to her mother's chemotherapy appointments, sat in the waiting room reading a book without complaint. He celebrated when she signed her 50th client, insisting they go out for ice cream like it was a Michelin star dinner. He never, not once, made her feel like she needed to be anyone other than exactly who she was. 10 months after their first date, on a clear Arizona night at the Hawthorne Estate in Paradise Valley, Preston got down on one knee. "Grace Winters," his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes, "you are the most remarkable person I've ever met. You're brilliant, kind, resilient, and you see the world in a way that makes me want to be better. I don't want to spend another day without you. Will you marry me?" Grace, the woman who'd once been told she'd never amount to anything, the woman who'd rebuilt herself from nothing, looked at the man who loved her not despite her struggles, but because of the strength they'd revealed, and said the easiest yes of her life. They were married 4 months later in a private ceremony at the Hawthorne Estate, surrounded by family and close friends. Grace's mother, healthy and radiant in remission, cried through the entire ceremony. Grace wore a simple, elegant dress, not because she couldn't afford more, but because she'd learned that true worth had nothing to do with price tags. She didn't change her last name legally. Winters Digital Consulting had earned its reputation, and she'd built it herself. But she became Grace Hawthorne in every way that mattered, including the most important one. She became someone who finally understood her own value. She never posted about the wedding on social media, never announced her marriage publicly. Grace had learned something valuable over the past few years. The people who truly mattered already knew, and the people who underestimated her weren't worth the effort of proving wrong. She had no idea that particular philosophy was about to be tested in the most public way possible. For 2.5 years, Grace lived in a kind of peace she'd never imagined possible. Her business thrived, now operating from a beautiful office in Scottsdale with 18 full-time employees. Her relationship with Preston deepened into the kind of partnership that made them both better. Her mother remained cancer-free, and they had dinner together every Sunday. Grace still drove a modest car, a new Honda, but nothing flashy. She still dressed simply, favoring comfort over brands. She and Preston had an understanding. His family's wealth was his family's wealth. She'd earned her own success, and she wasn't interested in becoming a caricature of a rich wife, shopping on Rodeo Drive and lunching with other rich wives who had nothing better to do. Preston loved that about her. "You're real," he'd say, pulling her close. "In a world of people pretending to be something they're not, you're unapologetically yourself." She didn't think about Tyler Hutchinson, didn't wonder what he was doing, didn't care if he'd heard about her success. That chapter of her life was closed, sealed, and buried so deep that it couldn't hurt her anymore. Until that Saturday afternoon at Scottsdale Fashion Square. Grace had been shopping for her mother's birthday, nothing extravagant, just a nice scarf from one of the department stores. Preston was in San Francisco for a business meeting, and Grace had decided to run errands solo, enjoying the rare afternoon to herself. She just purchased the scarf and was walking through the mall's main corridor when she heard her name. Not her name exactly, her old name, the one that came with a particular tone, a particular dismissiveness that made her stomach clench with muscle memory. Grace? She turned, and there he was, Tyler Hutchinson, looking exactly as she remembered, that same styled hair, that same expression of perpetual judgment, that same aura of someone who measured every person's worth by their net worth. And on his arm, a woman who looked like she'd walked out of a reality TV show about housewives who married for money. Platinum blonde hair, designer everything, and a rock on her finger that was probably intended to compensate for whatever personality she lacked. "Oh my God," the woman said, her voice a pitch that could shatter glass. "Tyler, is this the girl you used to date? The one who," she lowered her voice theatrically, as if Grace couldn't hear, "couldn't afford anything?" Grace's first instinct was to turn and walk away. She'd built a life so far beyond these people that engaging with them felt like descending into a pit she'd spent years climbing out of. But then Tyler spoke, and something inside her snapped. "Still shopping at discount stores, I see. Some things never change." The crowd around them had started to slow, sensing drama. Grace saw phones lifting, cameras pointing. In the age of viral videos, public confrontations were content gold, and Grace was about to become either the victim or the victor in whatever story these strangers would tell. She bent down, collected her shopping bag, and straightened to her full height. When she looked at Tyler, she didn't see the man who'd once made her feel worthless. She saw a small, insecure person who needed to tear down others to feel tall. "Hello, Tyler," she said, her voice calm, controlled. "It's been a while." "3 years," he said, that smirk still in place. You look like you're getting by. Good for you." Real quick, before we see exactly how this plays out, if you're hooked on this story and want to see Tyler get what he deserves, do me a favor, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what you'd say to your terrible ex if you saw them again, and smash that subscribe button, because this story is about to get so much better. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now, back to the mall, where Tyler Hutchinson was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. "Getting by," Grace repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Yes, I suppose you could say that." The blonde woman, Tyler's apparent girlfriend or fiancée based on the ring, looked Grace up and down with the kind of assessment wealthy women gave to service staff. "Those jeans are from Target, right? I used to shop there before Tyler helped me understand quality." Grace smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "They're actually from a boutique in Phoenix, but yes, they're comfortable. I spend a lot of time working." "Still at that marketing job?" Tyler asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer and found it amusing. "What were you, a coordinator or something?" "I own my own company now, actually, Winters Digital Consulting. We do brand development and digital marketing for mid to large-scale businesses." Tyler's smirk faltered just for a second before he recovered. "Oh, that's cute. One of those little freelance things. Good for you, Grace. Really, it's good to have hobbies." The blonde laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Tyler always says entrepreneurship is just unemployment with a business card." Grace felt something shift inside her. Not anger. Anger was too hot, too reactive. This was colder, sharper, calculated. "Speaking of business," Grace said, pulling out her phone, "I've been meaning to check on today's numbers. We just launched a new campaign for one of our clients this morning." She opened her email, scrolled through a few messages, and showed Tyler the screen. "There, 15% increase in conversions in the first 6 hours. My team is exceptional." Tyler glanced at the phone, clearly uninterested. "That's great, Grace, really. But there's a difference between running a small business and real success. I mean, I just closed a deal worth $42 million last week. It's not personal. Some people are built for the big leagues, and some people are more comfortable in their lane." The crowd around them had grown. Grace noticed several people filming, but she didn't care anymore. Something about Tyler's condescension, his absolute certainty that he was better than her, his complete inability to see anything beyond his own ego, triggered a response she hadn't planned. She'd spent 3 years not proving anything to anyone. She'd built her life quietly, purposefully, without needing validation from people who'd never understood her worth. But standing in that mall, watching Tyler try to humiliate her in front of strangers, Grace realized that sometimes silence isn't strength. Sometimes letting someone continue to underestimate you isn't grace. It's enabling their delusion. "Tyler," she said quietly, "do you remember the last thing you said to me?" His smirk faded slightly. The blonde looked between them, sensing a shift. "You said you'd regret leaving me. You said you'd end up begging you to come back. Do you remember that?" Tyler's jaw tightened. "Grace, I don't think we need to. You told me I'd never amount to anything without you. You said my mother's financial problems weren't your responsibility. You said if my mother had made better financial decisions, she wouldn't be sick." The blonde's face paled. Even she seemed to understand that Tyler had just been revealed as something uglier than a snob. "You left me when I needed you most," Grace said. "And you know what? It was the best thing that ever happened to me." Tyler's face flushed red. "You think you're better than me now because you run some little marketing company? Grace, I make more in a month than you probably see in a year." "Do you?" Grace asked, tilting her head. "How much do you make, Tyler, approximately?" He straightened, puffing up. "That's personal, but since you asked, $350,000 a year, plus bonuses. Not bad for someone your age, right?" Grace nodded slowly. "That is impressive. Genuinely, you've done well." Tyler's smirk returned, triumphant. The blonde squeezed his arm, vindicated. "My company," Grace continued, "generated $8.2 million in revenue last year. After expenses and payroll, I personally took home just over $2 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Tyler's mouth opened then closed. The blonde's hand slipped from his arm. The crowd of onlookers, many still filming, had gone completely still. "That can't be right," Tyler said, his voice losing his confidence. "You're lying." Grace pulled out her phone again, opened her banking app, and held it up. The screen showed her business account balance, $847,316.14. Her personal account displayed below it, $1,934,567.89. "I don't usually discuss finances publicly," Grace said, "but you made this public, Tyler. You decided to humiliate me in front of strangers, so let's be clear about who's actually successful here." Tyler's face had gone from red to pale. The blonde was staring at Grace like she'd just revealed herself to be a completely different species. "But you know what the real difference is between us?" Grace continued. "It's not the money. It's that I built something. I created value. I helped people. Every dollar I earned came from making someone else's business better, from solving problems, from working 18-hour days to turn ideas into reality. What have you done, Tyler? You shuffle papers. You close deals that other people structured. You take credit for work your team actually does. You're a middle manager with a superiority complex, and you've spent your entire life confusing a paycheck with self-worth." The crowd had started to murmur. I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God, she destroyed him." Tyler tried to recover, his voice sharp with desperation. "Money isn't everything, Grace. You're clearly still bitter about us, still trying to prove something. "I'm not trying to prove anything," Grace interrupted. "I am something. I'm a successful businesswoman. I'm someone who lifts people up instead of tearing them down. I'm someone my mother is proud of. And I'm someone who learned that the moment you walked out, my life got infinitely better." She picked up her shopping bag and started to walk away, then paused and turned back. "Oh, and Tyler, that scarf I just bought, it's from Hermes. It cost $3,000. I'm giving it to my mother for her birthday because, unlike you, I believe in taking care of the people I love, even when it's inconvenient." She walked away, her head high, her heart pounding, but her steps steady. Behind her, she heard the blonde hissing at Tyler, heard his attempts to explain himself to the crowd, heard someone say, "Dude, you just got annihilated." Grace didn't look back. She made it to her car before the adrenaline crash hit. Sitting in the driver's seat of her Honda, she let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 3 years. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from release. She'd spent so long not caring about Tyler's opinion, not needing his validation, building a life so separate from him that he was barely a memory. But standing up to him, finally telling him exactly who she'd become, felt like closing a door that had been left ajar, letting in a cold draft she'd learned to ignore but never fully blocked. Her phone buzzed. A text from Preston. "Just landed. Miss you. Dinner tonight?" "Absolutely. I have the best story to tell you." She started the car, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove home to the life she'd built, not because of Tyler Hutchinson, but because leaving him had forced her to discover who she really was. That evening, over dinner at their favorite Thai restaurant in downtown Phoenix, Grace told Preston everything. She expected him to be angry, maybe protective. Instead, he laughed so hard he nearly choked on his pad thai. "You showed him your bank balance?" he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "Grace, that's the most savage thing I've ever heard." "Too much?" she asked, suddenly worried she'd crossed a line. "Are you kidding? That guy humiliated you for years, abandoned you when you needed him, and then tried to do it again in public. You gave him a masterclass in karma." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "I'm proud of you, not for having money, for knowing your worth." "I almost walked away," Grace admitted. "I almost let him keep thinking whatever he wanted to think." "Why didn't you?" Grace considered this. "Because I realized that silence wasn't protecting me anymore. It was protecting him. It was letting him continue believing that people's value is measured in dollars and designer labels. And maybe," she paused, gathering her thoughts, "maybe someone in that crowd needed to see that you can be torn down, rebuild yourself, and come back stronger. Maybe someone needed to see that the people who hurt you don't get the final word on your story." Preston squeezed her hand. "You're remarkable, you know that?" "You keep telling me," Grace said, smiling. "I'm starting to believe it." What Grace didn't know was that the story was far from over, because in the age of social media, public confrontations don't end when you walk away. They take on lives of their own. By the next morning, #MallTakedown was trending on Twitter. Someone had filmed the entire exchange and posted it to TikTok, where it had already racked up 2.3 million views. The video had been reshared across Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. News websites were picking it up. "Woman destroys her ex who mocked her at the mall. The perfect revenge. How one woman's success became the ultimate comeback." Grace's phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. Her business partner Rachel called first. "Have you seen the internet?" Rachel asked without preamble. "What? No, I just woke up." "You're viral, like really viral. The video of you at the mall yesterday has millions of views. Our website crashed an hour ago from traffic. We've gotten 47 new client inquiries since midnight." Grace sat up in bed, her heart racing. "Rachel, I didn't want." "This is good, Grace. People are calling you a hero. The comments are insane. She's my new model. This is what female empowerment looks like. I want to hire her just based on this video. Grace, this is the best publicity we could have asked for." Preston, who'd woken up at the sound of her phone, looked at her questioningly. Grace put Rachel on speaker. "Show me," Grace said. Rachel sent her the link. Grace opened TikTok, an app she barely used, and there she was in crystalline HD, telling Tyler Hutchinson exactly who she'd become. The comments were overwhelming. She didn't just win the breakup, she lapped him twice. The way she stayed calm while destroying him is iconic. Target jeans and Hermes scarf. That's the energy I need in 2024. If my ex ever tries me, I want this woman's lawyer on speed dial. But there were others, too. Comments that made Grace's stomach turn. "She's probably lying about the money. No one dresses like that if they're actually rich. This is staged. No way this is real. Gold digger energy. She probably married rich and is pretending she earned it." Grace handed the phone to Preston, suddenly feeling sick. "This is too much. I didn't want this to be public. I didn't want—" "Hey," Preston said, setting the phone down and pulling her close. "You didn't do anything wrong. You stood up for yourself. You can't control how other people interpret that." "But what if it hurts the business? What if clients think I'm unprofessional?" "Grace," Preston tilted her chin up, making her meet his eyes. 47 new client inquiries. Your business partner said the website crashed from traffic. Does that sound like it's hurting the business?" Grace took a breath. He was right. She'd spent so long trying to be invisible, to succeed quietly, that the idea of being seen, really seen, terrified her in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Besides," Preston added, a smile playing at his lips, "I think it's time people knew exactly who Grace Winters is." By Monday morning, the story had exploded beyond social media. Local Phoenix news stations were covering it. Business publications were writing profiles of Winters' digital consulting. Grace's LinkedIn was flooded with connection requests, and Tyler Hutchinson had become the internet's favorite villain. Someone had identified him, not hard, given that Grace had said his name in the video, and discovered he worked for Pinnacle Financial Group in Phoenix. His LinkedIn profile, formerly public, had been deleted. His Instagram had gone private, but the internet is unforgiving, and screenshots live forever. Someone found an old blog post where Tyler had written about the problem with modern women not understanding traditional relationship dynamics, a poorly disguised rant about how women should be grateful when men provide for them. Another person found a Yelp review he'd left for a restaurant complaining that the waitress didn't seem to understand that some customers deserve better service than others. Tyler Hutchinson, in less than 72 hours, had become a case study in why you should never underestimate people, never assume your success makes you superior, and never, ever publicly humiliate someone when cameras are rolling. On Tuesday, Grace got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Grace Winters?" The voice was female, professional, slightly hesitant. "Speaking. I'm Mr. Alice's girlfriend, well, ex-girlfriend now. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from your business website." Grace's grip on the phone tightened. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize," Tamara said, and Grace could hear genuine remorse in her voice. "For what I said at the mall, for how I acted. I had no idea who you were or what you'd gone through. Tyler told me he said you were bitter and jealous and tried to sabotage his career. He said you were unstable." Grace closed her eyes. Of course he had. "After that video went viral," Tamara continued, "I started looking into things. I found articles about your company. I saw interviews you'd done. I read about your mother's cancer and how you helped pay for her treatment. And I realized Tyler had been lying to me about everything." "I'm sorry," Grace said, and meant it. "Finding out someone you trusted isn't who you thought they were is painful." He's exactly who you said he was, Tamara said quietly, a middle manager with a superiority complex. I saw it, but I ignored it because he made me feel special, like I was better than other people because I was with him. God, listening to myself say that out loud is humiliating. You're not the first person to fall for it, Grace said gently. I did too. The difference is you recognized it. That takes courage. I broke up with him yesterday, Tamara said. He's losing his mind. Apparently, his company is reviewing his employment after all the negative publicity. He tried to say the video was edited, that you ambushed him, that it was all taken out of context. But I was there. I saw exactly what happened, and I'm ashamed I participated in trying to humiliate you. Tamara, Grace said, you were caught up in his orbit. I know how persuasive he can be. I know how easy it is to adopt someone else's worldview when they present it with enough confidence. Don't be too hard on yourself. How are you so kind? Tamara asked, her voice breaking. After everything after what Because I remember what it's like to be where you are, Grace said simply, and I remember that the thing that saved me wasn't someone being cruel back. It was realizing I deserved better. You deserve better too. They talked for another 20 minutes. By the end of the call, Grace had given Tamara the number of the therapist who'd helped her rebuild her self-worth after Tyler. It wasn't much, but it was something. After she hung up, Preston looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She asked. Most people would have gloated, he said. Would have told her she got what she deserved for dating Tyler. She's a victim too, Grace said, just like I was. Tyler is really good at making people feel small so he can feel big. Breaking that pattern takes seeing it clearly. She's seeing it now. Preston pulled her into a hug. You're going to change the world, you know that? I'm just trying to survive going viral, Grace muttered into his shoulder. The attention eventually died down, as internet attention always does. Within 2 weeks, a news story had captured the public's imagination, and #MallTakedown became just another entry in the vast archive of viral moments. But the impact lingered. Winter's Digital Consulting doubled its client base. Grace hired 10 more employees. She started getting speaking requests from women's business groups, universities, marketing conferences. Her story became a case study in resilience, in building value, in understanding that success isn't about proving others wrong, it's about proving yourself right. Tyler Hutchinson was quietly let go from Pinnacle Financial Group 3 months later. Grace heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved to Denver, supposedly for a fresh start. She felt nothing when she heard, no satisfaction, no vindication, just a distant hope that he'd learned something. 6 months after the mall incident, Grace was invited to speak at Arizona State University's business school. The auditorium was packed with over 400 students, all eager to hear from the woman who'd become an unlikely symbol of entrepreneurial resilience and personal empowerment. Grace stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of young faces, and felt a wave of responsibility she hadn't anticipated. These weren't just students, they were people at the beginning of their journeys, many of them probably dating their own versions of Tyler, working for bosses who undervalued them, believing that success looked like what society told them it should look like. I'm not here to tell you a fairy tale, Grace began, her voice steady and clear. I'm not going to tell you that leaving a toxic relationship or starting a business is easy, or that everything works out perfectly if you just believe in yourself. Real life doesn't work that way. She paused, gathering her thoughts. What I am going to tell you is this. The moments that break you are also the moments that show you what you're made of. When my ex-boyfriend told me I'd never amount to anything, when my mother got sick and I had to choose between paying her medical bills and eating more than ramen for dinner, when I was working 2 jobs and building a business at midnight in a studio apartment, those weren't the moments I felt strong. I felt terrified. I felt alone. I felt like I was drowning. The auditorium was silent, every person leaning forward. But here's what I learned. Strength isn't feeling confident all the time. Strength is doing the work even when you're scared. It's choosing yourself even when everyone around you is telling you you're making a mistake. It's understanding that other people's opinions of you, good or bad, don't define your worth. A hand shot up in the third row. Grace nodded at the young woman. How did you know you were ready to start your own business? I have so many ideas, but I'm afraid of failing. Grace smiled. I wasn't ready. That's the secret no one tells you. You're never really ready. I started my business because I had no other choice. My day job wasn't paying enough for my mom's treatment, and I needed more income. Fear of failing was real, but fear of not being able to help my mother was bigger. Sometimes you don't overcome fear, you just find a bigger fear that motivates you more. Another hand, a young man in a business suit that looked like it came from his father's closet. But you married someone wealthy, right? Didn't that make everything easier? Grace had been waiting for this question. It came up in every interview, every comment section, every conversation where people wanted to diminish her success. I married Preston 2.5 years after I started my business, she said clearly. By the time we met, Winter's digital consulting was already successful. I didn't need his money. I needed a partner who respected what I'd built. And yes, being married to someone from a wealthy family comes with privileges I won't pretend don't exist. But my business success came before that relationship, not because of it. She leaned forward, her voice more intense. And can I tell you something? The assumption that a woman's success must somehow be attached to a man, that she either married into it or had help from a boyfriend or father, that assumption is exactly the kind of thinking that keeps people small. It's what Tyler believed. It's what a lot of people still believe. And it's wrong. The auditorium erupted in applause. Grace felt tears prick her eyes, but blinked them away. Another student, this one a young woman with nervous energy, stood up. What would you say to someone who's in a relationship like the one you described? Someone who feels small all the time, but doesn't know how to leave? Grace's heart broke a little. She saw herself in that question, the version of herself who stayed with Tyler months longer than she should have, who made excuses for his behavior, who believed that love meant accepting someone treating you poorly. I would say this, Grace began, choosing her words carefully. If someone makes you feel consistently small, consistently less than, consistently like you need to earn their affection or respect, that's not love. That's control disguised as love. Real love makes you feel bigger, not smaller. Real love celebrates your success instead of competing with it. Real love doesn't require you to shrink so someone else can feel tall. She paused, making eye contact with the student who had asked the question. And I would say that leaving is terrifying and it might feel impossible, but staying in a relationship that diminishes you is worse. Because every day you stay, you're teaching yourself that you don't deserve better. And you do. Everyone deserves better than that. The young woman sat down, wiping her eyes. Several other students around her reached over, touching her shoulder, offering silent support. Grace spent another hour answering questions, telling stories, offering advice that she wished someone had given her at their age. When it was over, at least 30 students stayed behind, waiting to speak with her individually. She stayed until the last one had shared their story, asked their question, taken their photo. As she finally left the auditorium, exhausted but energized, she found Preston waiting for her in the lobby with coffee and a proud smile. "You were incredible," he said, handing her the cup. "Those kids are going to remember this for the rest of their lives." "I hope so," Grace said. "I hope at least one of them walks away knowing they deserve better than I thought I deserved." They walked out into the warm Arizona evening, and Grace felt something shift inside her, a sense of purpose beyond just building her business or proving Tyler wrong. She'd become, accidentally, a voice for people who felt voiceless. And maybe that was the real gift that came from that humiliating encounter at the mall. The story should have ended there, neatly wrapped with Grace's success, her fulfilling marriage, her impact on young entrepreneurs. But life, as Grace had learned repeatedly, doesn't follow neat narrative arcs. 3 months after her ASU speech, Grace was in her office reviewing a campaign proposal when her assistant knocked on the door. "Grace, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent. His name is Tyler Hutchinson." Grace's pen stopped mid-signature. For a moment, she considered having him removed. She'd moved past him, built a life so separate from their shared history that he was barely a footnote. What could he possibly want? "Should I call security?" her assistant asked, clearly having looked up who Tyler was. "No," Grace said, surprising herself. "Give me 5 minutes, then send him in." She used those 5 minutes to center herself, to remember who she was now versus who she'd been when she knew him. When Tyler entered her office, Grace barely recognized him. The confident swagger was gone. He looked thinner, older, worn down by something that went deeper than just the passage of time. His suit was off the rack, his shoes scuffed. The man who'd once mocked her for shopping at Target now looked like he could barely afford Target. "Grace," he said, standing awkwardly near the door, "thank you for seeing me." Grace said, "You have 10 minutes, not unkindly, but firmly. What do you want, Tyler?" He moved further into the office, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Scottsdale, the elegant furniture, and the wall of awards and client testimonials. His face showed what looked like genuine pain. "I came to apologize," finally, he said, "for everything, for how I treated you when we were together, for what I said at the mall, for—" his voice cracked slightly, "for being exactly the person you said I was." Grace leaned back in her chair, studying him. "What happened, Tyler? Why now?" He sank into the chair across from her desk without being invited, and she didn't stop him. He looked like a man who needed to sit before he fell. "Losing my job was just the beginning," he said quietly. "After the video went viral, after Pinnacle let me go, I thought I'd just move somewhere else and start over. But turns out when you're the internet's villain of the month, new employers Google you. Every interview I went to, they'd seen the video. Every networking event, people recognized me as that guy from the mall." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I moved to Denver, got a job at a smaller firm for half my old salary, lost that job 6 months later because I couldn't perform. Moved to Austin, same thing. I've been through 5 cities in 8 months, Grace. I'm living in a studio apartment in Tucson now, working as a junior analyst for barely above entry-level pay." Grace felt something unexpected, pity. Not the kind that made her want to help him, but the kind that recognized genuine suffering. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me," Tyler continued. "I'm telling you because it took losing everything for me to understand what you tried to tell me at the mall. I measured my worth by my salary and my status, and the moment those things were gone, I realized I had nothing else. No real friends, just networking contacts. No real skills, just the ability to take credit for other people's work. No real identity, just a performance of success." He looked up at her, and she saw something she'd never seen in him before: humility. "You told me I was a middle manager with a superiority complex. You were right. I've spent the last 8 months in therapy, the only smart thing I've done in years, trying to figure out why I needed to make people feel small, why I couldn't let you be successful, why other people's achievements felt like my failures." "And what did you discover?" asked Grace, genuinely curious. "That I'm deeply insecure," Tyler said with a bitter laugh. "That I grew up with a father who only valued achievement, who told me that being average was the same as being worthless. That I learned to measure my value by comparing myself to others instead of actually building something valuable. And that I treated you, someone who actually cared about me, like garbage because some part of me couldn't stand that you had something real inside you that I didn't." Grace was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this, Tyler? What do you want from me?" "Nothing," he said, and she believed him. "I don't want your forgiveness. I don't want a job reference. I definitely don't want money. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything, and I'm sorry for every moment I made you doubt yourself. You deserved better than me then, and you deserve better than this apology now, but I needed to say it anyway." He stood up, preparing to leave. Grace remained seated, processing everything he'd said. "Tyler," called Grace as he reached the door. He turned. "I hope you figure it out. I hope you find whatever it is that makes you feel valuable without needing to diminish anyone else. Not for my sake. I moved on years ago, but for yours." He nodded, his throat working. "I hope so too. For what it's worth, I'm genuinely happy for you. You built something real. You became someone remarkable, and I'm sorry I ever tried to convince you otherwise." After he left, Grace sat at her desk for a long time, staring out the window at the Arizona landscape. She felt strange, not satisfied, not vindicated, just oddly at peace. The man who'd once been her villain had become just another broken person trying to figure out how to be better. She picked up her phone and called Preston. "Tyler just came to my office," she said when he answered. "Do I need to come down there?" Preston asked immediately, protective instincts engaging. "No, he apologized, really apologized. I think he meant it." Preston was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" "Honestly, I feel like I can finally close that chapter completely, not with anger or resentment, but with understanding. He was broken when I met him, he's still broken now. The difference is, he knows it." "You're incredible," Preston said softly. "Most people would have torn him apart." "He's already torn apart," Grace replied. "What would that accomplish?" That evening, over dinner at their home in Paradise Valley, Grace told Preston the full story of Tyler's visit. As she spoke, she realized that the encounter had given her something unexpected: closure. Not the dramatic, satisfying closure of movies where the villain gets destroyed and the hero rides off into the sunset. Real closure, the kind that comes from recognizing that the people who hurt you are just people, flawed and struggling, and that your healing doesn't require their destruction. "Do you think he'll actually change?" Preston asked, refilling her wine glass. Grace considered this. "Maybe. Probably not entirely, but I think he'll be less awful than he was, and sometimes that's all we can hope for." "You've changed too," Preston observed. "The Grace I met 3 years ago would have had security escort him out without a conversation." "The Grace you met 3 years ago was still building walls," Grace replied. "I don't need walls anymore. I'm secure enough in who I am that other people's brokenness doesn't threaten me." Preston reached across the table and took her hand. "Have I told you lately that you're the best thing that ever happened to me?" "Not in the last 3 hours," Grace said. "You're slipping." They laughed, and the heaviness of the day lifted. Grace realized that this simple moment of connection with someone who valued her, who celebrated her success, who made her feel bigger instead of smaller, this was what she'd been searching for all along. Not revenge on Tyler, not vindication, just the peace of knowing her own worth and sharing her life with someone who saw it too. The next morning, Grace woke up to an email that would change everything again. It was from the producer of a major morning show requesting an interview about building a business after emotional abuse and the viral moment that sparked a national conversation. "They want you to fly you to New York next week," Preston said, reading over her shoulder. "That's the Today Show, Grace. That's huge." Grace stared at the email, feeling that familiar flutter of anxiety mixed with excitement. "I don't know if I want to be the poster child for woman who got revenge on her ex. That's not what my business is about." "Then make it about what it is about," Preston said simply. "You control the narrative. Tell them about resilience, about building value, about understanding your worth. Use the platform to say what you want to say." Grace thought about the student at ASU who'd asked about leaving a bad relationship. She thought about Tamara, Tyler's ex-girlfriend, who'd called to apologize. She thought about the thousands of comments on that viral video from people saying they'd been inspired to leave their own toxic relationships, start their own businesses, demand better treatment from the people in their lives. Maybe going public wasn't about Tyler at all. Maybe it was about everyone who needed to hear that it was possible to rebuild after being torn down. "Okay," she said, "I'll do it." The Today Show interview aired on a Tuesday morning. Grace wore a simple navy suit from a boutique in Phoenix, not designer, not Target, just professional and authentic. She sat across from the host in the bright New York studio, more nervous than she'd expected to be. "Grace Winters," the host began with a warm smile, "you've become something of a cultural phenomenon in the past year. A video of you confronting your ex-boyfriend went viral, leading to an explosion of interest in your business and your story. But I want to start at the beginning. Tell us about the woman you were before that moment at the mall." Grace took a breath and told her story. Not the sanitized version, not the triumphant hero's journey, but the real story, about loving someone who made her feel worthless, about her mother's cancer and Tyler's cruelty, about the long, terrifying months of building a business while working a full-time job, about meeting Preston and learning what real partnership looked like. That moment at the mall, Grace, when you showed him your bank balance, some people have criticized that as being ostentatious or vengeful. How do you respond to that? Grace had thought about this question a lot. I think people who criticize that moment are missing the point. It wasn't about the money, it was about refusing to let someone continue to define my worth incorrectly. Tyler spent years telling me I was worthless without him. He tried to do it again in public, and I decided that this time I wouldn't be silent. Not because I needed to prove anything to him, but because I needed to prove something to myself, that I wouldn't let anyone make me small ever again. "And your business?" the host continued. "Winters Digital Consulting has grown exponentially since that video went viral. How do you balance that growth with staying true to your original mission?" "The growth has been incredible and honestly overwhelming at times," Grace admitted, "but our mission hasn't changed. We help businesses tell their authentic stories and build genuine value. Every client we take on, we ask ourselves, are we making something better? Are we creating value? If the answer is no, we don't take the work, regardless of how much they're offering." The interview lasted 15 minutes. Grace talked about resilience, about the importance of mentorship, about her foundation that provided free marketing services to women-owned small businesses. She talked about her mother, healthy and happy now. She talked about understanding that your worst moments can become your greatest teachers. What she didn't talk about was Tyler. When the host tried to ask about him, Grace politely redirected. "I don't think focusing on him serves any purpose. My story isn't about revenge on an ex. It's about what happened after I chose myself. That's the story that matters." The interview ended, and as Grace left the studio, she felt lighter than she had in months. She'd told her truth, controlled her narrative, and used the platform exactly how she wanted to. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Just watched, so proud I cried. When did my baby become so wise?" Then another from Preston. "You're trending on Twitter again. Hashtag Grace Winters is #2 nationwide. You were perfect." And finally, one from an unknown number. "Thank you for what you said about choosing yourself. I just left my emotionally abusive boyfriend because of your interview. You probably saved my life." Grace stared at that last message for a long time. This was why the discomfort of going public mattered. This was why telling her story, even when it felt vulnerable and scary, was worth it. She texted back, "You saved your own life by making that choice. I'm just glad I could be a small part of your journey. You deserve every good thing that comes next." As her flight back to Phoenix took off, Grace looked out the window at New York disappearing below, then pulled out her laptop. She had work to do, proposals to review, clients to serve, a business to run. The viral moment had brought opportunities, but it was the daily work of creating value that would sustain everything she'd built. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she thought about Tyler, working as a junior analyst in Tucson, hopefully learning to measure his worth by something other than his superiority over others. She didn't wish him harm, she didn't wish him failure, she wished him the kind of transformation she'd experienced, painful, necessary, ultimately freeing. But mostly she thought about the future, about expanding her business to new markets, about the mentorship program she was developing with ASU, about her life with Preston, which continued to surprise her with its depth and joy. about all the moments yet to come that would define who she was becoming. The plane reached cruising altitude, and Grace opened a proposal document, losing herself in the work she loved. Below, America stretched out in patterns of cities and farmland, highways and rivers, millions of stories intersecting in ways both random and profound. Grace's story wasn't special because she got revenge or married rich or went viral. It was special because it was true. You could be broken and rebuild yourself. You could be underestimated and prove everyone wrong, including yourself. You could lose everything and still create something valuable. You could face your demons and walk away stronger. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person who once told you you'd never amount to anything would show up years later, broken and humiliated, to tell you that you were right all along. That wasn't the victory Grace was seeking, but it was the one she got. And in learning to accept it with grace instead of gloating, with understanding instead of vindication, she'd proven something far more important than Tyler's opinions ever threatened. She'd proven to herself that she was exactly who she'd fought so hard to become. Someone who knew her worth, someone who lifted others up, someone who understood that success wasn't about being better than anyone else. It was about being better than who you used to be. And as the plane carried her home to Arizona, to Preston, to her mother, to the business and life she'd built from nothing, Grace Winters smiled, because she'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. The person whose opinion mattered most was looking back at her in the mirror, and that person was pretty darn remarkable. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated or torn down by someone who should have lifted you up, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me about your comeback story. Tell me about the moment you chose yourself. And remember, your worth isn't determined by anyone else's opinion of you. Not your ex, not your boss, not your family, not the internet. You decide who you are. And that decision is the most powerful thing you'll ever make.